Okay, thank you guys for joining the GitLab screening and interview training. As you guys all know, hiring and interviewing is really critical to every business, but it's even more important to make sure you get the right candidate in a fully remote environment. And it can be really tough to screen and select for the right candidate in 30 to 45 minutes. Hiring a great candidate, we all know, it's more than just a really good candidate. It also requires some responsibility on us as the screeners and the interviewers to make sure we extract all of the best data from a candidate. So obviously research shows that past performance is the best indicator of future performance. So we do some things called behavioral interviews that allow us to get the full story of how a person has performed in the past, which helps us make a better decision on how the person will perform in the future. So we use behavioral interviews to help us select who to bring in at GitLab, and that'll be a huge part of today's training. But first, I want to talk about being prepared. So now that you're going to be a screener or an interviewer, you need to be prepared for every interview or screening call that you do. Before we measure how successful a candidate will be in the job, we need to make sure that we understand the job at hand. So we always try to maintain the most accurate and up-to-date job descriptions that detail the purpose of the position, the primary tasks and responsibilities, and the skills needed to fulfill those tasks. As a screener, please spend time actually getting acquainted with the job description and understanding fully what is required of the person in this role. If you don't understand, feel free to ask the people ops team or the hiring manager for clarity. If there's something you don't understand or something that doesn't make sense, likely if it doesn't make sense to you, it doesn't make sense to the candidate reading on the other side. So we do keep these descriptions up to date. So we're always changing them. It's important that if you've interviewed or screened for a position in the past, that you understand what the new description is and that you make sure you are comparing the candidates to the new description and not the past description. So it's also important to note that a huge part of GitLab interviewing is not just evaluating a candidate's skills, but also their values and how their past actions have demonstrated whether or not their values are aligned to ours. So that evaluation will happen during STAR questions. I'll touch on that later. But for now, just remember to be prepared for the interview by knowing the description, like front to back, and having fully read the candidate's resume and cover letter before your interview. I know it sounds small, but take 5 minutes. It's also really good practice to make a note ahead of time about any particular items of interest or clarification. So that way, during the interview or phone screen, you can address it directly with the candidate. Now, there's some side of interviewing and screening that is a little bit less sexy and a little bit scarier, actually. There's the legal side of things. So there are certain things that you cannot ask during an interview. The United States has some of the strictest employment discrimination laws, and so we will use those as our guides and abide by those in our hiring procedures. If you're not familiar, there are federally protected classes of people which it's illegal to discriminate against in hiring. So those protected classes are race, color, religion, national origin, sex, age, pregnancy, citizenship, familial status, veteran status, disability status, and genetic information. Some states also include height, weight, and HIV status as protected classes. Now, I understand that that is very different in a lot of countries and places. I know it's very common for people in Europe to include their marital status on their CVs even, but do not ask about these classes. It's best for us not to know any of this information because without it, it's impossible to make a decision that's based on illegal discrimination. We can't discriminate if we didn't know. So all of your questions should be focused on the skills required to perform the job or their past experiences in STAR questions. If your question is not job related, just simply don't ask it. That's how you can be really safe. For instance, I'll give a good example. If a person mentions that she and her family might move, it would be inappropriate completely and totally against our policy to ask if she's married or has any children, just because that she mentioned that she had a family. you would be prying into her familial status, and that could potentially be seen down the road as discriminatory. However, it would be legal and appropriate to let her know, hey, we have a compensation calculator and we pay our candidates based on location, and then ask her where she intends to relocate so that we can better understand her compensation. That's a question that's totally within the realm of acceptable. So just remember, we don't want to pry into any of that personal information and avoid it at all costs. Now, let's get to actually doing and conducting the screening call or the interview. Opening up the call is one of the most important barriers to break. It can be very awkward to just begin talking to someone that you don't know, especially over a video call. So start by building some rapport with the candidate. At the beginning of the call, ask a few questions to ease the tension, like, how are you doing today? Or is this your first video interview? Just be mindful of those legalities that I talked about just a minute ago. Smile, be welcoming, be really warm, and help the candidate relax. Remember that the power dynamic is a little bit weird, and the candidate may be really nervous. So the responsibility is with us as the interviewer or the screener to make that person feel at ease. After you've gotten a smile or a laugh or help break down the barrier in some way, just ask an opening question or two, then you can feel free to transition into your questions that you have prepared. So there's a little bit of a difference between screening and interviewing, and I'll go through how those calls operate differently. If you're conducting a screening call, all of the questions have been built out for you in Lever and will appear in your feedback form on Lever. So we're standardizing the screening questions to reduce variation and ultimately reduce bias. Each interviewer will begin with some open-ended questions, like why questions. Like, why have you applied to GitLab? Why are you looking for a new role? Why have you moved between these past roles? Those questions will be followed by star questions, which I mentioned before. And then finally, a couple of small details like their location and their legal name. Then you can open it up for the candidate's questions. And during that question answer time from the candidate, share the answer that you have for the candidate, but when possible, also direct people to the handbook. It helps demonstrate really early on to candidates that we do actually document everything, and that transparency is really built into who we are. If you are conducting an interview as opposed to a screening call, your questions will not all be prepared in the Lever form. So we expect you, as part of the hiring team, to think about what you want to know of the candidate and his or her experience, and create open-ended questions that lead you to learn more and gather more data about them. It's important, it's so important that you develop these questions before you begin interviewing so that you can ask all candidates the same set of questions. Again, this is to eliminate bias and variation within the hiring process. Obviously, your conversations and clarifications are going to lead you in all of your meetings to take different turns and dive deeper into candidate skills. And so ultimately you'll have different conversations with every candidate, but it's so important that we begin with a strong set of the same questions across the board. Each interviewer will ask one star question to each candidate, which will be included in your feedback form. So you'll already know which value you're looking for and what the star question is and how to probe deeper into that. So now I'm going to get to the tough stuff, which is star questions. STAR is a method for behavioral interviewing. Each interviewer will have at least one star question listed in the Lever feedback form, and each star question is aligned with one GitLab value. As a reminder, the values are collaboration, results, efficiency, diversity, iteration, and transparency. So over the course of the interviews, a candidate will be asked a star question about each of those values. As the interviewer or screener, you will ask the open-ended questions provided in the form, and then you'll gather all the data on the candidate's past experience and behaviors, and then you'll reflect on whether or not those behaviors exemplified were in line with the GitLab value you were assessing for. Candidates will not always just immediately provide the data that you're looking for, so you're going to have to be prepared to ask clarifying questions to probe deeper and extract more data. As I said before, the best indicator of future performance is past performance. So we are going to want to know the full story. You'll know you have the full story when you have the STAR information. So that acronym actually stands for situation, task, action, and result. And you can use that acronym to help you remember what you're uncovering. So S is situation, and you want to understand what the situation was, what was really going on in their example, what was happening in their team or their organization. T is the task at hand. What was their job in the situation? A is action. What action did they take? What did they do in the situation? R is result. What was the result of their actions? The candidate will describe a situation, and it is your job as the interviewer to probe and make sure that you ask the clarifying questions and reveal that STAR information. So Pablo gives a very great demonstration of how to conduct a STAR interview. That video is listed in the training materials for interviewing and screening training as well. So look it up. The last thing that's very important is taking notes. It can be a real challenge to balance active listening with really good note taking. But active listening is extremely important because it can help you form deeper clarifying questions. A good strategy is to summarize what the candidate has told you and then repeat it back to them to check that you've heard and understood everything that they've said correctly. When you listen actively and engage fully, candidates tend to keep talking and divulge more and more data. So it's really great to do things like nod and confirm that you've heard what they've said. So it just gives them the confirmation that they need to continue and to know that they're on the right track. So you have a lot to remember during this whole 30 or 45 minutes. So it's really important also that you take good factual notes. So take notes throughout the interview. It shows that you're attentive and it helps capture all the data and facts as they happen. Remember, it's okay to ask candidates to repeat themselves. You may also use keywords in your notes. It may be useful to you, so that might remind you of the full context of the conversation. There are some things also that don't belong in your notes, like general impressions, like this candidate seems nice or this candidate appears intelligent. Those impressions, like everyone else, your first impression can be faulty. So instead, we need to rely on the facts given to us from the interview. You should never record your opinion or a judgment based on a candidate or about a candidate either, like whether or not you thought they were pretty. That would be something that would be totally inappropriate to record. And we want to make sure that we have unbiased, fact-based notes on their skills and experience, not really their personality. We're trying to build a culture of inclusion, not just a company of people that look and talk and act like us. So to end the screening or interview, you ask the candidates if they have any question, like I mentioned before, and allow enough time at the end for you to answer fully. Remember that you are a representative of GitLab and likely the first person that they've actually ever met or talked to from GitLab, and you should impart on the candidate the culture and the values that we hold in esteem here. So before you end the interview, thank the candidate for their time. Make sure you smile again. Whether the interview went really great or really not great, that's okay. Smile, thank them for their time and their consideration. Let them know it will be 2 to 3 business days before they hear back from us, and then you can log off. So thanks for taking the time to do this training. If you have any other questions, obviously I'm always available in the hiring channel.